The Washington, D.C. area is something of a haven for lawyers, with plenty of work available to keep those JDs busy. The nation's capital has more lawyers per capita than any other city in the U.S. Only Tallahassee, Florida comes close. But even in D.C., a place that has one lawyer for every 25 residents, according to the American Bar Association, there is one attorney so notorious today that he is standing out from the crowd. I'd like to introduce you to Jeffrey Clark, Esquire, an environmental lawyer by trade. Clark has spent much of his career trying to get the federal government out of the business of regulating greenhouse gases, working either in the private sector or for the Justice Department during the Bush and Trump administrations. But Clark's ambitions went much, much higher than that. It went as high as the office of the Attorney General of the United States. Whereas Monday's video presentation by the January 6 Select Committee gave us a view of the election night chaos at the White House as top aides told the president that the math was impossible, explained to him that there was no path left that could deliver him a second term as president, urged him to face the fact he'd lost the election. On Tuesday, we learned about what went on inside the Oval Office 2 months later, on January the 3rd, about 72 hours before the attack on the Capitol. Jeffrey Clark, then a mid-level lawyer at the Justice Department, tried to convince Trump to let him, Clark, lead the DOJ so he could help the then president overturn the results of the election. Clark's boss, acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen, learned that Clark had managed to get a meeting with Trump at the White House. According to the Washington Post, Rosen tracked down his deputy Richard Donoghue, who had been walking on the mall in muddy jeans and an army T-shirt. There was no time to change. They raced to the Oval Office. History is calling, Clark told the president. This is our opportunity. We can get this done. Donoghue urged Trump not to put Clark in charge, calling him not competent, and warning what happens if within 48 hours we have hundreds of resignations from your Justice Department because of your actions, Donoghue said. He asked Trump, what does that say about your leadership? Donoghue also mocked the idea of Clark taking over the DOJ. Quote, you're an environmental lawyer. How about you go back to your office and we'll call you when there's an oil spill? Of course, we know that Clark failed in his apparent attempt to take the top job at the Justice Department. Otherwise, chances are by now he'd probably be a household name. But as it is, we first learned about Clark's alleged actions in January of 2021 in the immediate aftermath of the insurrection. But Tuesday's reporting provides crucial details from depositions and interviews and emails compiled by the Post and gives the fullest picture yet of what Clark appeared willing to do to help his president stay in power at any cost after his boss told Trump, no, it wasn't legal. As the Post reports, Rosen told Trump that the Justice Department could not flip a switch and change the election, according to notes of the conversation cited by the Senate Judiciary Committee. I don't expect you to do that, Trump responded, according to the notes. Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressmen. Ah, yes, the Republican congressmen, men like Scott Perry. The Post reports that Clark had found an ally in the Pennsylvania right-winger. When Perry called Donoghue in late December to complain that the Justice Department hadn't sufficiently investigated the election, he mentioned Clark as someone who could really get in there and do something about this. I bet he did. Both Perry and Clark have refused to cooperate with the January 6th committee. Clark reportedly invoked the Fifth Amendment when he appeared before the committee in February, 2 months after the panel voted to refer him to the DOJ for contempt of Congress. And let's not forget, Perry is one of those members of Congress who sought a pardon from Trump, according to Vice Chair Liz Cheney at the committee's first hearing. There's been an avalanche of information revealed in just 4 hours of testimony and footage during the hearing so far, including the deposition played Monday from former Attorney General Bill Barr. Remember, it was Barr's abrupt resignation as AG in mid-December that led to Clark making his play for the top job at the DOJ. In his interviews with the committee, Barr paints Trump as, what was it again? Detached from reality after the election. Have a listen.
Right out of the box on election night, the president claimed that there was major fraud underway. I mean, this happened, as far as I could tell, before there was actually any potential of looking at evidence. I said, how long is he going to carry on with this stolen election stuff? Where's this going to go? And by that time, Meadows had caught up with me. He said, look, I think that he's becoming more realistic and knows that there's a limit to how far he can take this. I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit. And he was indignant about that. They'd wasted a whole month on these claims on the Dominion voting machines, and they were idiotic claims. I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations. I felt that before the election, it was possible to talk sense to the president. And while you sometimes had to engage in, a big wrestling match with him, that it was possible to keep things on track. But I felt that after the election, he didn't seem to be listening. I was somewhat demoralized because I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality. I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bull. And, I didn't want to be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did.
As riveting as it was on Monday to hear Bill Barr reveal his astonishment at how unhinged he said he believed Trump had become, it was also important to hear Trump's own hand-picked AG, a veteran of the conservative legal movement in this country, saying this stuff out loud. But Barr is no hero. He's saying all this stuff now, but let's not forget that when Barr resigned from the Justice Department in December 2020, he gave credence to those baseless voter fraud allegations in his resignation letter. He hailed Trump's leadership and accomplishments at length, some might say ad nauseum. And he talked about how proud he was to have served as Trump's Attorney General. Let's also not forget that just last March, Barr said he'd vote for Trump again if he's the Republican nominee in 2024. So for Barr to have appeared before the committee only now and only under subpoena is the barest minimum. It is not the stuff of heroism. Far from it. Bill Barr, like so many in Trump world, stayed silent when he should have spoken up. I'm glad that some of these ex-Trump figures like Barr are now trying to help the Select Committee get accountability for the violence on January the 6th. I just wish they had done something at the time to help prevent it in the first place. Who better to help us get a handle on all that we've learned than Donald Ayer, who served as Deputy Attorney General in the George H.W. Bush administration, the person who succeeded him in that job, Bill Barr. Donald Ayer, thanks so much for coming back on the show. I haven't read an account about a showdown between the Justice Department and the White House this riveting since Alberto Gonzales and Andrew Card reportedly faced off against Jim Comey as they tried to get a hospital bed-bound John Ashcroft to sign off on renewing the NSA spying program during the George W. Bush administration. A lot of drama, it seems, went on behind the scenes. You're someone who worked at the very top level of the Justice Department. What is your take on what's reported to have transpired in that Oval Office meeting, in particular when this mid-level DOJ lawyer is trying to convince Trump to give him the top job, and not for the first time?
Well, I think that was sort of the last gasp effort to try to get the Justice Department to participate in the effort to steal the election. And the folks, who had been put in place, Rosen and Donahue, resisted that, and it's good that they did, and it's good that other people stood up to it. But it just shows the former president's willingness to try anything and try many things, one after the other, in order to steal the election. And that's what we're hearing about in these hearings that are going on this week and next week.
So I want to read to you what Trump told Jeffrey Clark after the acting AG and the deputy AG and the assistant AG for the Office of Legal Counsel and the White House counsel all advised Trump against appointing Clark as Attorney General. Quote, Trump made his decision and turned to Clark. I appreciate your willingness to do it, Trump said, according to Donahue. I appreciate you being willing to suffer the abuse, but the reality is you're not going to get anything done. These guys are going to quit. Everyone else is going to resign. It's going to be a disaster. The bureaucracy will eat you alive, and no matter how much you want to get things done in the next few weeks, you won't be able to get it done, and it's not going to be worth the breakage. The then president of the United States didn't say we shouldn't do this because you're unqualified or it's illegal or it's unconstitutional. He says, we're not going to do this because, people are going to resign. This is the guy who tens of millions of Americans are planning to perhaps entrust with the presidency again in 2 years' time.
Yeah, I think one of the important things that these hearings are showing is the layers of activity that President Trump was willing to engage in. And this was one of the later ones, although by no means it's at the end of the story. And I mean, I guess it's coming right around the time that he is leaning all over Brad Raffensperger in order to essentially change the vote count in Georgia. I mean, he was just systematically engaged in trying to use any one of a number of levers to try to change the result. It's really quite incredible. And I think that's one of the great benefits of this hearing is that we're hearing enough detail to make it all quite clear just what happened.
He certainly was systematic and relentless and obsessed. He wasn't governing the country at the time as COVID was killing thousands of people, that's for sure. Donald Eyre, you'd moved on from the Justice Department to private practice when Bill Barr came into the DOJ, takes your old job. But you know Barr, you've watched him for decades. Some seem to think he's now some sort of speaker of truth to power, this guy who stood up to Trump, when he didn't say a word about any of this publicly at the time.
Right. Well, and a lot of people had the same feeling at the time that he had his hearing to become Attorney General. And people said that he'd been a stand-up guy and could be counted on. And but he's been very much a person focused on an extreme level of executive power his whole career. And I guess I think one of the most important things to keep in mind, the letter that you read from is obviously very telling. Here he is saying these things that he told Trump, and I believe he told them. I mean, I'm assuming that these facts are pretty much facts. But then he turns around a few days later and he writes a sycophantic letter, basically saying nothing about any of it. The other thing that I think we all mustn't forget is that throughout his term, as his 2 years as Attorney General, he was engaged in all manner of misconduct in terms of misusing the powers of the Justice Department, among other things. Well, he used including
misrepresenting the Mueller report, famously, as one judge pointed out. Quick last question before we run out of time. I do want to quickly just play to you what Attorney General Merrick Garland had to say on Monday about the 1-6 committee's work. Have a listen.
I am watching, and I will be watching all the hearings, although I may not be able to watch all of it live. But I'll be sure that I'll be watching all of it. And I can assure you that the January 6th prosecutors are watching all the hearings as well. We are proceeding with full urgency with respect, as I've said many times before, to hold all perpetrators who are criminally responsible for January 6th accountable, regardless of their level, their position, and regardless of whether they were present at the events of January 6th. We're just going to follow the facts wherever they lead.
Donald Eyre, you worked in the Justice Department. When Merrick Garland says they're proceeding with full urgency, does it look like to you that this is full urgency?
It does to me. I mean, I think he's really doing the job that he's there to do. I think he's, it's not possible and it's not appropriate for the Attorney General to be making political statements or proclaiming that he's going to go get Donald Trump. I think he's conducting himself just exactly right. And I think there's a lot of evidence now that the department really is moving ahead with this investigation. And I'm hopeful that, the evidence we hear from these hearings are going to come at us again in papers filed in court.
I've been skeptical myself, but I do hope you're right about Merrick Garland. Donald Eyre, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your analysis. Appreciate it.